Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. Today, I have a great guest, Dr. Weili Gray. We've known each other now for several years. Over those years, I've just seen Dr. Weili grows so much in so many ways. And so I wanted to bring her onto this podcast to show an example of living like a wealthy life with a wealthy mindset. So Weili, why don't you introduce yourself a little further?
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast, Dr. Elisa. I'm honored, and I love the work that you do, and it's been an honor to know you all these years and see you grow and see all the cool things that you have been doing. And so for your podcast, I guess, so I am a sleep doctor practicing. I'm a W-2 employee practicing in a rural area in Vermont. I am in a critical access hospital, and I am also the host and the founder of Dare to Dream Physician Travel podcast, where I also put out a weekly podcast and share about just any travel inspiration, really inspiring physicians to live their life to the fullest and not hold off on that, like not wait 20 years till their retirement, but really to make the most of their life now. And if it involves anything with fun, adventure, and travel, I'm going to share a lot of ideas on the podcast as well.
Yeah, I know we have a shared interest in finance, and you at some point had discovered the white coat investor and really started getting your money in order. And then you were at a point where you're working in Vermont and you start feeling burnout at your job. So let's go back to that place. How long ago was that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually experienced burnout many points in my medical journey, and it probably started as an intern because at that point, my husband and I just got married and we were expecting our first baby. And this was like, our first son was born October of my intern year. It was like totally scary and totally countercultural. And it was one of the craziest things that we did. And, all the things that you expect from being overwhelmed, we experienced it like probably, 10 times. And so I just remember at a point in my residency, I actually really like the doctoring part. There was nothing wrong with that, but I just felt so overwhelmed in my life. I would walk into the cafeteria at work, especially when I was on call, and I'm like, why can't I just be a cafeteria worker? I would just look at different jobs and I'm like, any job is better than the job I'm in now just because of how little control of my time, of my schedule I have. And it wasn't just, once I had a family, it wasn't just myself, like taking care of myself or neglecting care of myself. It was neglecting care of my loved ones. And that was just a very difficult thing to process. And so somehow we survived that, maybe not so gracefully, but then, it's like we made it. I became an attending and found this really great job, mostly because I looked, I should also add that when I was almost done with my training, we had this total loss house fire. And so that was a wake up call for me and my family that, hey, tomorrow is not guaranteed. And, all these things that I have been sort of giving up in my own life just so I could, meet the next step and not, offend anybody else in, maybe working my hardest as a resident and all of that stuff, is it really worth it? So I sort of had this wake up call, like, my life is my life. And, if I had a funeral next week, what's really going to be important in the life that I wanted to achieve? It's probably not some of the people and the things that I was trying to impress. So actually, because of that, when I interview for jobs, I actually interviewed asking for a part-time position. It was at first my husband's idea, and I was like, "You're absolutely crazy. He's non-medical. I'm like, who would ask for that? First thing out of training. Like, do you know how just terrible of an idea that is?" But I did because of what we went through, and I was like, yeah, that really is what I want. And by the way, most doctors that work part-time actually work 40 hours. So is it really part-time? So, and when I started interviewing for it and telling people that's what I wanted, the crazy thing was nobody cared. Nobody batted an eye. They're like, okay, this is what you're looking for. Yeah, this is actually what we have. I mean, some places were actually really happy to that I was asking for that because that was their need. And so that was a big revelation. And then, so here I was, I got my first job. It was a really nice job. It was a part-time position, although, like I was anticipating a part-time position, especially with some added extra work. Like I'm a sleep doctor, I was seeing clinic, but I also do sleep studies on my own time. So with all of that extra added work, it was definitely more than 40 hours a week. But still, it was pretty chilled, especially compared to what we did as residents. And then I was about 5 years into my attending job, and I experienced my second round of burnout. And that was in the middle of COVID. So that was about 3 years ago. It was middle of COVID, things were changing. I thought that I signed up for the perfect job, the perfect administration. There was this mutual respect between doctors and the administrators, and it just seemed like everybody listened to each other, and it just was, I couldn't I felt bad for the doctors that, talked about how horrible their work situation was. And I just felt grateful that that was not the work that I had. But then all of a sudden, that was the works, that became the work environment. At least it felt like that at the time, 3 years ago.
Yeah, I remember at some point you were thinking like, oh, maybe I will become like a financial planner. Like I'm pretty good at managing this money stuff that that I was going to leave medicine to do
Absolutely.
that.
It's crazy to think that now, but that was exactly what I thought. I felt, and in retrospect, that was my midlife crisis moment because I felt like here I was, I did everything I was supposed to, and I landed in this job. I moved my family yet again to this new area, and something happened that was totally beyond my control. People changed at work and the work environment changed, and there was COVID, and the hospital got new pressures. And all of a sudden, the work that I showed up for isn't the work that I loved anymore. And it had nothing to do with the practice of medicine. I loved that part, but it was just all the other parts that was beyond my control. And so I just thought there's not really a great solution out of this. I mean, I could try to get another job, but even if that job looked perfect and I moved again for this job, what if it changes in 3 years? So, or 5 years? Am I going to keep moving my family every 3 to 5 years just for my job, just to find that good, dream job? So that was actually when I felt this pain because I'm like, I really don't know what else to do in my life because we trained all this time just to be doctors. And I was like, well, maybe there's one way out. Like I could just do something else that's not medicine. And I did, even though I felt so discouraged and so stuck, the one power thought that I had was, hey, we're doctors. Like I'm a doctor. I got into medical school. Like I'm smart, I'm resourceful, like I don't need to feel this way. So I had that inkling in me. And so that's why I was looking at other things. And it just turned out that that one other thing that I kind of, felt more confident in doing was my own personal finance, because that was one of the things I taught myself when I was, going through a sabbatical and had a little bit of free time. So yeah, that was that was how it all started. My burnout led to let me just quit medicine because I feel like there is no way out.
Yeah, and then you actually discover life planning, right?
Yeah, and then I so it was great because and I encourage every doctor to sort of branch out of medicine. Not necessarily you don't have to quit your job or do something radical like that, but to just talk to people outside of medicine to get their perspective. I mean, my spouse is an engineer who's now a homeschool stay-at-home dad. So, but he has some perspective. Like, yeah, some of the stuff that's in the culture of medicine is not normal. And so what I did is when I decided, well, maybe I should try financial planning, I signed up for this conference that was all financial planners. And I was the only, so I was certainly the only doctor, and I was probably the only non-financial planner in this conference. And it was so interesting to sort of, see how they thought and see how they looked at things and the things that they would put up with and the goals that they have. So that was one thing that was eye-opening. But the other thing was I went through this process called life planning. And it was almost accidental because I just kind of signed up kind of curious what this was, but I was sort of thrown in because at that time, talking about money, at the time, I've only signed up for conferences with CME money. So, most of it was reimbursed either by residency or my employer. But this time it sounded like a lot of money at the time. I paid $1,000 of my own money. It wasn't tax deductible. And so I was like, if I pay this much money out of pocket, I better get the most out of it. So when they said, will someone volunteer, to sort of be a demo person to get life planned on, I was one of the people who raised their hand, even though at that time I would never have spoken in front of a crowd. But I'm like, I need to get my money's worth out of this. It was basically going through and really reflecting on what is important to you. If money was not a big factor in your life, what is your dream life? What would you want your life to be like? Which is a super fun question. So, that was fun to answer. And then the next question got a little bit more serious, like, hey, if you think if you don't have your health, so if you might die in the next 5 to 10 years and you don't know exactly when you're going to die, but your life is going to be limited, what would your life be like, even if you weren't financially independent? So that, and then the last question, was really reflecting on regrets. Like if you knew you were dying in 24 hours, what did you miss? Who did you not get to be? What did you not get to do? And so going through those questions, I mean, I even feel like sort of shivers as I think about those, but I answer those. And not only that, I share that, with in front of this group, and there was these, sort of these reflective exercises that we did, and a lot of reflection, a lot of imagining, based on the questions, the way I answer those questions. Well, what is that perfect moment? What is the perfect moment in my dream life, even if it's 6 months from then? And when that was shared with me, sort of when the life planner reflected back from all the answers that I gave and kind of crafted this moment in time, 6 months from now, what living my dream life felt like I could almost touch it. I could, see it. And it just really clicked. I'm like, I want that. And the truth was, and the truth for most of us for all of us who are listening, is that there is nothing preventing you from getting that. I mean, we choose the freedom to live our dreams, and really nobody can take that away from us. Not your medical director, not your CEO, not your bank account. This is something that we make that decision, that we are free to dream. We give ourselves the courage to dream. And when you have that dream imagined in your mind, and you say that out loud, that you can actually act toward it. So, and I'm happy to share any of the details of my dream at the time, but it was actually really simple. Like it wasn't even expensive or anything, but it felt so unattainable. And I think that's true for most of us, is when, if we even give ourselves the courage to dream and we say what we want, it sounds really impossible. But someone else who's listening may be like, yeah, like that doesn't even sound all that hard. How would you do, what would you do to get that? And that's when you start, being really creative with the how you get that. But the how is not nearly as important as, what is your dream?
Yeah, so it really sounds like you had this mindset shift and you started looking at your life at a completely different way. And so talk about you've had so many changes over the last few years in terms of spending the time with your father in his last days, and now kind of traveling the world. So kind of step us through like how that life planning experience and really realizing what you want out of life, how you started implementing that like step by step.
Yeah. Yeah. So the secret is you just take the next step. You go with the next step. So when you have this really incredible vision that you so resonate with, that you're like, that lights your soul on fire, and you're like, I want that, remember that energy. Like try to keep going back to that energy. And the thing is, you don't have to know like what's the 10th step from there to get what you want. You just try the next step. So actually, when I had the life planning, the first one of the things that just came up for me was, I don't want to quit medicine. I love being a doctor. I really enjoy, my time with patients. And the only thing that I didn't like was, how at the time some of the work environment made me feel disempowered as a physician. And I'm like, I do not need to feel like that. So I actually just decided to stay at my job. And the major change that I made was I and I was, mentioning that I was a pretty quiet person. I'm an introvert sort of, by nature, but I just started speaking up at work, for example. So I would just, maybe express my opinion a little bit more when certain things were happening, or just really not be afraid to speak up, to dissent, to just say I disagree with what's happening. I have a problem with what's happening. Or if someone says no to me, instead of just putting my head down and say, ah, see, I knew it, nobody is supportive of me. No, I asked, well, who said no? Like you said someone said no, but who was that person? I want to talk to them and I want to hear why. And I want to, hear their point of view. And let's see if we can, find an agreement. It's really like small steps at a time. So that was the one thing that I changed at work, was that I just decided that, hey, the worst case scenario is if I stay here and I really annoy people here and they fire me. But I'm like, I had already wanted to quit. So, really it's not going to be worse than what I originally had planned. So it sort of just gave me the courage to be more authentic to who I was, and not be scared to sort of listen to myself and just become a more confident person altogether.
Yeah, and I remember you really advocated for yourself and you advocated to get a scribe, and no one had scribes where you were at, but you were able to get one. And then other people were starting to able to also advocate and get scribes. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was I don't think really I think I knew scribes existed, but I went to this summit, and one of the presentations that was made was this doctor who was like on the verge of burnout, and she got a scribe, and she actually later founded a scribe company, but she got a scribe, and it really like shifted her life from burnout, and she felt like life was manageable and she enjoyed practicing medicine. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of doctors can relate to this, right? So I'm like, yeah, like 100%. This is a no-brainer. And I actually, even reached out to her and made an appointment, and, spoke to her. And actually, they gave me like the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, I'm like, you're preaching to the choir. Like, I'm an employed physician. And it turns out that, like, I think all of her clients were, private practice docs who are just, this is like just part of their business expense. I'm like, I have to convince my employer, my administration to go for this. So so it was a little bit scary, but they're like, okay, no, it's fine. Let us we'll give you some, handouts to maybe try to convince them, and whatever it was. So I sort of, I didn't let it sit for too long, but I kind of, tucked that in, and I'm like, no, this is definitely going to change my life. So I don't, it sounds like a small thing, but not long after that, there was an opportunity to sort of negotiate with my hospital about something. And even though it was completely unrelated to the scribe, I was like, hey, you guys are asking me to do something extra. And really, I have limited time and energy. And, they know that work life balance is important for me. And I said, so that I can keep doing higher level tasks, why don't you help me deal with some of these lower level tasks, which is documentation, right? Like, I mean, really, no doctor really likes documentation, but it was especially draining for me. And so it was definitely not a yes, like enthusiastic yes at first. And I think that's what, I think every listener who's listening, like, how did she get that, should know. I didn't just get it like easily, but I just, I kept the conversation going. I kept asking, and I kept, going back and forth. In the end, it worked out. We found a win-win. I found something in a way that I could serve them, and they found something, the scribe, in a way that really helped me. So that went through. And the cool thing was, a few months later, they offered this voluntarily to another doctor at the hospital, who was undergoing some changes in their staffing model. So they sort of like, now they use this as a tool for physician retention. And then maybe about a year later, they actually offer this option to all the doctors and APPs at the hospital, that if they wanted it, because there was yet another change that was going on, that was sort of, they were using this as a retention tool. So again, I know that I was, changing the culture at the hospital? No, but I just thought like this would be amazing. And I asked, and I kept asking, and I'm really pleased to see what the end effect was. But that's the thing is, when we just feel really strongly about something and we're like, this might feel small, but this is a game changer in our life. And then we speak up for that. You never know. I mean, yes, like you might change your life if you get it, but you may change a lot of other lives just by speaking up.
Yeah. And so it really sounds like it came from you first starting to advocate for yourself, having a voice, figuring out what you wanted, and actually working towards getting what you wanted. It wasn't easy and you had to do some convincing, but in the end, your hospital was actually open to it and it actually changed the entire culture of where you were.
Yeah, and I think that is what I would really encourage, all the listeners to lean into is, the whole art of negotiation. Like negotiation, I think brings sort of like nervousness to most doctors because nobody, like, I mean, most of our parents didn't teach us how to negotiate, and school definitely didn't teach us how to negotiate. So we're extremely educated, extremely well trained people, but we have, zero experience and zero training in negotiation. So one of the things that, to me, it's like part of learning how to be an adult is learning negotiation, and not only learning but embracing it, like practicing it every day and embracing it, and don't back down from it, because negotiation is really about really communicating at a very important, honest, basic level with another human being, and try to be creative and how to find win-win situations. It's like, how can I serve you in a way that I can serve you, and how can I find ways so you can help me as well. And there's something really satisfying about that. Once you sort of practice it, and you do enough of it, and you see how it can impact your own life and other people's lives.
Yeah. And then unfortunately, your father's health started to decline. And so let's talk about how you had on your life plan that you want to be with him and how you negotiate with your hospital to make that happen.
That is so interesting because when I was doing my questions, my answers to the three questions, one of the sort of afterthoughts that came up was, I'm an only child. That's the other context. It's like and my parents live about 11 hours drive away. And I wrote, I want to be there for my parents at the end of their life. And when I was writing this, my dad had already been through this journey of stage 4 metastatic cancer. So I knew that, that's probably going to be the first parent where this is going to apply to. And when I wrote that statement, it was totally scary. I started crying, when I shared this with somebody, because I just didn't, like, for me, I knew it was so important, but I also had no confidence that I could do it. And I don't really, like, it's funny because, certainly with COVID, I'm a sleep doctor. We ended up being able to telehealth visits. So that was, that was one tool that I ended up using to be 11 hours away from work, and still not take all of my PTO. But really, I tucked that idea in. And then I think about 2 years later was when it was clear that, this is now the end of my dad's life. And this is going to be, like, I remember getting the phone call from my mom, like, I didn't even know he was going to live that day. So I just said, I'm going to drop everything and drive my kids. And my husband was going to follow soon after, down from Vermont to Maryland. And and I had grown a lot in those 2 years, from like totally being scared that I could even be there for my parents, to this is a non-negotiable. I actually didn't ask my work. I just told them, I said, my dad is not doing well. I don't know what's happening, but, I'm worried that he may not even live, past today. And I think I had to cancel clinic that day, and I just drove down there. And then once I was down there, fortunately, I ended up being there for 6 weeks until he died. But fortunately, he sort of rallied a little bit. And that's the tricky thing about, being physicians, being away from your loved ones. And then, especially if there are critical times, it's not like there's a timeline. It's not like someone calls you and say, okay, like your dad is sick and you're going to have 6 weeks there. I had no idea. I didn't, at one point I was like, I think maybe he has 6 more months. I don't know. And I almost wanted to go home until he didn't do well again. But anyway, I'm glad I didn't go home. But it was, ended up being the 6 weeks. I did make, so I just told, I told my work, I'm like, I'm here, I can do telehealth visits. So honestly, I didn't even put that much energy into negotiating, because to me, in my mind, like, this was a non-negotiable. And again, I mean, I probably wouldn't have had that confidence in what are my non-negotiables. I clearly didn't, because like 2 years prior to that, I didn't even think that it was possible to be there for him.
Right. And and then let's go to now. Like in the last year, you have gotten passport after not traveling outside the country for, I think you said 15 years. And now you've gone like across the world multiple times. So, so how'd you get to that place? And where did the drive to do that stem from?
Yeah, I really believe that there are seasons in life. And I remember even like in my first 5 years as an attending, this is before my dad got sick. So, it wasn't because of my dad being sick that I didn't want to travel, but my kids were really young. I have three kids. The youngest now is 7, but back then, she was like a baby or a toddler. And I just told myself, I'm like, I think this is a time for me to just, really save money, invest money. I didn't really, I had a really boring life. I mean, I didn't really I didn't really have much to spend my money on. So aside from maybe like eating out or something. So I just told myself, like, it's okay. Like, I'm just gonna, invest and save, and then my dad got sick, and I really didn't want to go that far away. And of course, this was also like in the middle of this COVID came, and so like we couldn't really travel much anyway. But even when the travel ban sort of lifted a little bit, he got sort of quite critically ill, so I didn't want to travel for that reason. And so when he passed away and I was grieving, I knew that we were ready for this new chapter in our life. And so when I sort of, this is again an example of, when you have this inkling of a dream, you don't have to know all the steps. If you told me when I was like, I'm ready for this new chapter in my life, and then a year later, we would have gone on like all these trips and gone to different continents, I would not have believed it. But what I did do was I just took the next step. So I, applied for passports and got those in. And then I just booked like a trip that felt a little bit outside of our comfort zone, which was going to the US Virgin Islands. That was the first trip that we had ever gone outside the continental US as a family, as a family with kids at all. But certainly as a family of 5, like we used to travel a little bit with when the family was smaller, but once we became a family of 5, it was like really scary in my mind to travel. So we just did something that was a little bit like, that was exciting, but a little bit scary and out of our comfort zone. And then that's sort of how it started. And then we went after the Virgin Islands. And by the way, I'm still working at my job during this time. I did have some PTO that was sort of extra from the years that I didn't use it, but really I just kind of made use of the PTO that, all the doctors at my hospital get, and just made the most of it. But yeah, we ended up going to Hawaii, and then we went to this really cool off the beaten path island called Eleuthera in the Bahamas. Then we went to Puerto Rico, and then we went to Taiwan, and then we went to Australia, and then we just came back from this really fun month of slow travel in this Portuguese island in the Atlantic called Madeira. It's actually closer to northern Africa than it is to Europe, but it was the perfect place weather-wise to spend November. So my family was there for the whole month of November. I flew back for about a week to do some clinics, so I didn't have to take all my PTO time. But it was just such a fun adventure.
Yeah. So how are you balancing PTO time, working, finances, and being able to travel so much while I know that you're being financially responsible with it? So let us in on some of your secrets.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be honest, like I said, there's seasons in life. And one of the things that I feel strongly about is, let's not delay our dreams. Let's just live our dream life now. And I mean, I say that as a doctor, right? Doctors, by nature are really good delay gratification people, right? So I'm not saying that like, hey, let's just rack up all this credit card debt and whatnot, but I'm saying this as a doctor. So I've delayed a lot of gratification in my life. And I did save quite aggressively, like I said, when my life quote was really boring, when with young kids, I didn't really want to do all this stuff. So I just feel like this is now the season and the chapter in life. And that may be different, for the listeners, that may be different, like where that chapter is for you. But for me, I'm like, hey, one of my parent is still healthy, one passed away, and, in a way that just felt I felt like it went as well as it could. I was able to be there for him, and I'm just, of course, we're still grieving, but we're actually this whole year we've been sort of traveling in honor of my dad. Like on his birthday, we were in the Great Barrier Reef as a family, like my mom and all the people that were important to him. So I just feel like living that life that I really want and is important. So I honestly have just really expanded my budget for traveling. Like that's one thing is like decide what do you want to do with your money? Like do you how important is it for you to get to that number, and whether that number is like 3 million or 5 million or whatever it is on your spreadsheet. It is that like, and I'll tell you, I had a certain number in mind, and 5 years into being an attending I reached that number, and it was completely anticlimactic. And I actually felt really lonely because aside from my husband, who doesn't really even care that much about money, who I was like, hey, look, we reached this. I couldn't even tell that many people that I knew because, most people don't really relate to, having such goals. So, I told one of my other friends that I trusted, and that was it. And I'm like, this is really not that satisfying. And the truth is, even if I had 2 times, 3 times, 5 times that number on my spreadsheet, I'm still not going to feel 100% secure, right? Because there's all these things that are outside of our control, whether that's inflation, just all sorts of things. I mean, even identity theft, right? I mean, we don't know. And so that's why I think I've in this chapter of my life, I'm like, yes, I'm still, maximizing my retirement. I'm still, investing, but that's really not where I want to put most of my money. I want to put my money in a way that I can get I didn't make up this term. It comes from the book, Die with Zero, memory dividends, right? Like my kids are young, my husband and I are healthy, my mom is healthy right now. I have other, aunts and uncles who are healthy. I want to make as many memory dividends as I can, and that will pay us back in life. So yeah, so that's one sort of perspective, which is, I am uncomfortably budgeting for traveling, but yet living this amazing life as a result of it.
Yeah, I like to talk a lot about spending on your values, and travel is one of my number one values. It's the highest number on my spending plan or budget, however you want to call it. And it's just always been one of my passions. And so that's where I really put my money. And so I traveled even when I didn't have money. I traveled when I was in med school and grad school and residency and fellowship, because that is what I valued the most. And so that might mean that I spent less in a lot of other places that other people were spending money on, so I could have that money to spend and travel.
Absolutely. And that goes to the next question that, the next question that most doctors have is like, well, how do you make the time for it, right? Because for doctors, it's the money and the time. So the time, I mean, all the doctors in my hospital get a very similar PTO structure, and it's pretty generous. And in general, doctors probably at most employed positions get somewhere between 4 to 8 weeks. Maybe some of the doctors, who with really generous plans may get 12 weeks. I don't get that, by the way. So it's a variable, right? And what I don't want listeners to do is listen and be like, oh, well, I'm not that doctor. Like I only get the 4 weeks. I'm not that doctor that gets the 12 weeks. So that means I can't do this. But what I would encourage is optimize whatever it is that you do have and make the most of it. Because the truth is, and I know this is true at my hospital, most of my colleagues don't even take the whole thing that they're allotted. They do not take their full PTO. And I didn't. For years, I didn't. And I actually, the first year, I think that, after my first year being attending, I got this really nice surprise that if we don't take all of our PTO, we actually get paid back for it. It's like part of it carries over, and then we actually get paid a dollar amount, like our hourly rates for the work that, for the PTO that we didn't take. So I remember getting this big check, and I'm like, hey, like at first I was like, this is a good thing. And then I saw how much taxes were taken out of it. I'm like, okay, like it doesn't feel as valuable anymore. And I mean, there were many years when when I would get this check. And there was one year, and I don't know how long, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, when I told myself, hey, my goal for this year is to actually either get a smaller check on this PTO payback or not get a check at all. Like that was like literally, I challenged myself. It felt really weird to say this, but I'm like, if that were to become true next year, that means I use this time, and time is valuable. Like, even though for me, that was a stretch because I'm like, I really liked getting this check. I was like, no, but that there's this value to my time that I'm not accounting for here. So that's I think that's my message is for to just there is some value in taking time off from work, whether that's just taking time at home and do a stay vacation or going on an adventure and have the time of your life and make amazing memories with your family, with your loved ones. It is some a little bit out of our comfort zone and really in American culture countercultural.
Yeah. And I was one of those doctors who only had 4 weeks of PTO with one of my jobs. And that was during COVID, which was the only reason why I didn't use it all up. All the other times that my very first job, actually, it was use it or lose it. So I used every single day. But so when you talk about there is a certain amount of PTO, and yes, I do have a friend who gets 12 weeks of PTO at his job, and I'm so jealous. It's so amazing. I mean, I'm not jealous anymore because in working part-time, the way I work, I can essentially take off as much time as I want. It's just, I'm not making money when I don't work. But that aside, I mean, you spent 3 weeks in Australia, almost 2 weeks in the Virgin Islands. You just slow traveled for a month. So obviously you weren't just using PTO for all this travel time. How else did you actually navigate so that you could have this dream or, live your dream life now while you're still working?
Yeah, I think I shared earlier that, I had those extra PTO. So when my dad passed away, my regular PTO allowance for the year, I actually had about half of it kind of built up. So this past year was a little bit unusual in that I did have, more PTO than I usually would. But there are strategies that I use, and I'll add a caveat that, you may have different strategies. So don't listen to my strategies and think, well, I can't use those, so, I'm hopeless. That's not true. But I think these strategies may work, if you're a shift worker, like if ER or anesthesia or hospitalist. I do part-time clinics. So one of the things that I try to do is, I try to schedule the vacation between two pay periods. So let's say I do a 2 week vacation, sort of the week before I try to fit in some extra clinic time. And then the week that I come back, I try to fit in some extra clinic time. So that way I'm not even taking the full 2 weeks off. So that's one hack that I do. The other hack is, especially because I am able to do telehealth visits. So one thing I found out that was a huge bummer is you cannot bill Medicare for telehealth visits if you're outside of the country. So I had that's actually what happened in November was I had planned to, kind of relax and chill in Madeira. And we rented this really nice but inexpensive villa, with a pool and this beautiful view of the ocean. And I thought I was going to do telehealth visits there. And then, on the other days, explore the island. Well, it turned out that I'm not going to commit Medicare fraud. So I had to change those plans. And so what I did was my family was there for the month, but I flew back and did sort of more than a week worth of clinic. So remember, but my week is not, all 5 days. So I did about 4 days of clinic and that counted, for a little bit over a week of time. And then before I left and after I came home just this past week, I did, lots of extra shifts. So again, that was kind of how I was able to get a whole month of slow travel for my family and me be there. To them, it felt like I was there for most of the time, but I really did not take a whole month off at all. So that's another way. But if I was in the US, so when I was visiting my relatives in San Francisco, I did do telehealth clinics and I was able to, have that quality time with my family, but also, not take all my PTO time as a result of it.
Yeah. And I like how you share, don't use this against yourself, but there are different ways that different people can start to think about well, how can I make this happen? Right? If you ask your brain a question, your brain's going to want to figure out an answer. And so it may not be the same answer for you. Like what Weili did may not be something you could do, but there may be something else that you could do to stretch out your PTO or to stretch out the time that you have off that you could travel and find ways of doing it.
100%. The one other one that I want every doctor to think about is, if you're a full FTE, just think about, is that worth it? Is that worth it in your life? And, do you want to think about decreasing your FTE? Because I will say that I just because I have more energy and time, somehow I think it's been more profitable for me to be a part-time physician than as a full-time physician. And I honestly don't even can't tell you like exactly why that is, but there's just something about being able to have that bandwidth to really, plan our life, financially plan, just kind of have a strategy for life. And I have, my finances, I would say, has not suffered at being a part-time physician.
Right. And also looking at like what you can provide and what you offer. So I now work part-time, but I actually make just about as much as I made when I was working full-time. And it's because I fly to a place where I'm in much more demand. And so they're willing to pay for that demand. And in fact, it's funny, when I fly to Peoria, there's often where I talk to other people on, waiting for the flight, that they're another physician and they're also flying in to offer their subspecialty. It's a lot of subspecialty surgeons, but also like anesthesiologists. And so depending on your specialty and depending on your situation, you may consider traveling somewhere else in order to kind of make more for the time that you're working.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I think you're just such a great example of showing how you can live like your dream life now and work every day to be closer to that dream life so that you don't have to think about escaping your current life. Often as physicians, we get trapped in this arrival fallacy. It'll get better when, right? Like all through, when you're in med school, you think it's better in residency, you think it's better in fellowship, and then you think it's better in tending. And so we want to get out of that mode of thinking and really think like, okay, how can I make today as close to my dream life as possible? And just step by step, move towards that. And then we might find that I love the idea of financial independence, retire early. And that's what I really strive for a while. But at some point I realized, wait, I'd rather step back and make life great now and not have to think about like, oh, life's going to be great when I can retire, right? Because that goalpost often keeps moving. And like you said, you get to a certain money point and then you may still not feel secure about actually leaving work and retiring and doing all the things, even when you get to whatever goal that is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for what you do. I love that you talk about, what's a wealthy life and, talk about finances. Finances are absolutely important. The technical part of finance is important, but really equally important is that the mindset, what we think about it, how we think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it does take money to pay for these things. And that's why you do the investments and you find different ways of passive income. But in the end, you really just need to start thinking about what do I want and how do I get there? And, step by step, take actions. And that's what gets the ball rolling so that you can actually finally achieve. And then even when you achieve that, you're going to find other things that you want to achieve, but that's the beauty of life. Anyway, thank you so much for being on the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If people want to reach out to you, tell them how they can find you, tell our audience more about your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since you are on a podcast platform, you can go ahead and type in Dare to Dream Physician Travel Podcast and subscribe. I would love for you to listen and get inspired to live your life to the fullest through travel. And I'm on all the social media platforms except for TikTok, but LinkedIn, I haven't been brave to venture that yet, but I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and I am also on LinkedIn. So, any of those platforms, go ahead and type my name in and follow me. And I would love to, send me a DM if you have any suggestions of places you want to hear about on the podcast. I love to, chat with my listeners.
And I'll have all that information in the show notes as well. So thanks for listening to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.